On the following day, the first clear sign of danger appeared. 3 armed tribesmen approached and asked what the boy and the alchemist were doing. "I'm hunting with my falcon," the alchemist answered. "We're going to have to search to see whether you're armed," one of the tribesmen said. The alchemist dismounted slowly, and the boy did the same. "Why are you carrying money?" asked the tribesman when he searched the boy's bag. "I need it to get to the pyramids," he said. The tribesman who was searching the alchemist's belongings found a small crystal flask filled with liquid and a yellow glass egg that was slightly larger than a chicken's egg. "What are these things?" he asked. "That's the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. It's the masterwork of the alchemists. Whoever swallows the elixir will never be sick again, and a fragment from that stone turns any metal into gold." The Arabs laughed at him, and the alchemist laughed along. They thought his answer was amusing, and they allowed the boy and the alchemist to proceed with all of their belongings. "Are you crazy?" the boy asked the alchemist when they had moved on. "What did you do that for?" "To show off one of life's simple lessons," the alchemist answered. "When you possess great treasures within you and try to tell others of them, seldom are you believed." They continued across the desert. With every day that passed, the boy's heart became more and more silent. It no longer wanted to know about things of the past or future. It was content simply to contemplate the desert and to drink with the boy from the soul of the world. The boy and his heart had become friends, and neither was capable now of betraying the other. When his heart spoke to him, it was to provide a stimulus to the boy and to give him strength, because the days of silence there in the desert were wearisome. His heart told the boy what his strongest qualities were: his courage in having given up his sheep and in trying to live out his personal legend, and his enthusiasm during the time he had worked at the crystal shop. And his heart told him something else that the boy had never noticed. It told the boy of dangers that had threatened him, but that he never perceived. His heart said that one time it had hidden the rifle the boy had taken from his father, because of the possibility the boy might wound himself. And it reminded the boy of the day when he'd been ill and vomiting it out in the fields after he had fallen in a deep sleep. There had been 2 thieves farther ahead who were planning to steal the boy's sheep and murder him. But since the boy hadn't passed by, they decided to move on, thinking that he'd changed his route. "Does a man's heart always help him?" the boy asked the alchemist. "Mostly just the hearts of those who are trying to realize their personal legend. But they do help children, drunkards, and the elderly too." "Does that mean I'll never run into danger?" "It means only the heart does what it can," the alchemist said. One afternoon, they passed the end camp of one of the tributes. At each corner of the camp were Arabs, garbed in beautiful white robes, with arms at the ready. The men were smoking their hookahs and trading stories from the battlefield. No one paid attention to the 2 travelers. "There's no danger," the boy said when they had moved past the end camp. The alchemist sounded angry. "Trust in your heart, but never forget that you're in the desert. When men are at war with another, the soul of the world can hear the screams of battle. No one fails to suffer the consequences of everything under the sun." "All things are one," the boy thought. And then, as if the desert wanted to demonstrate that the alchemist was right, 2 horsemen appeared behind the travelers. "You can't go any farther," one of them said. "You're in the area where the tribes are at war." "I'm not going very far," the alchemist answered. Looking straight into the eyes of the horsemen, they were silent for a moment, and then agreed that the boy and the alchemist could move along. The boy watched the exchange with fascination. "You dominated those horsemen with the way you looked at them," he said. "Your eyes show the strength of your soul," answered the alchemist. That's true, the boy thought. He had noticed that, in the midst of a multitude of armed men back in the encampment, there had been one who had stared fixedly at the 2. He had been so far away that his face wasn't even visible. But the boy was certain that he was looking at them. Finally, when they had crossed the mountain range that extended along the entire horizon, the alchemist said that they were only 2 days away from the pyramids. "If we're going to go our separate ways soon," the boy said, "then teach me about alchemy." "You already know about alchemy. It is about penetrating the soul of the world and discovering the treasure that has been reserved for you." "No, that's not what I meant. I'm talking about transforming lead into gold." The alchemist fell silent as the desert and answered the boy only after they stopped to eat. "Everything in the universe evolved," he said, "and for wise men, gold is the metal that evolved the first. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. I just know the tradition is always right. Men have never understood the words of the wise. So gold, instead of seen as a symbol of evolution, became this basis for conflict. There are many languages spoken by things," the boy said. "There are times when for me a camel's whininess was nothing more than whinnying. Then it became a signal of danger, and finally it became just a whiny again. But he stopped. The alchemist probably already knew all that. I know true alchemists, the alchemist continued. They locked themselves in their laboratories and tried to evolve as Gold had, and they found the Philosopher's Stone because they understood that when something evolves, everything around that thing evolves as well. Others stumbled upon the stone by accident. They already had the gift and their souls were readier for such than the soul of others. But they don't count. They're quite rare. And then there are the others who are only interested in gold. They never found the secret. They forgot the lead, copper, and iron have their own personal legends to fulfill. And anyone who interferes with the personal legends of another thing will never discover his own. The alchemist's words echoed out like a curse. He reached over and picked up the shell from the ground. This desert was once a sea, he said. I noticed that, the boy answered. The alchemist told the boy to place the shell over his ear. He had done that many times when he was a child and heard the sound of the sea. The sea has lived on in its shell because that's its personal legend, and it never ceased doing so until the desert is once again covered by water. They mounted their horses and rode out in the directions of the pyramids in Egypt. The sun was setting when the boy's heart sounded a danger signal. They were surrounded by gigantic dunes, and the boy looked at the alchemist to see whether he had sensed anything, but he appeared to be unaware of any danger. 5 minutes later, the boy saw 2 horsemen waiting ahead of them. Before he could say anything to the alchemist, the 2 horsemen became 10, and then 100. And then they were everywhere in the dunes. They were tribesmen dressed in blue, with black rings surrounding their turbans. Their faces were hidden behind blue veils, with only their eyes showing. Even from a distance, their eyes conveyed the strength of the soul, and their eyes spoke of death. The 2 were taken nearby to a military camp. A soldier shoved the boy and the alchemist into a tent where the chief was holding a meeting with the staff. These are the spies, said one of the men. We're just travelers, the alchemist answered. You were seen at enemy camp 3 days ago, and you were talking with one of the troops there. I'm just a man who wanders the desert and knows the stars, said the alchemist. I have no information about troops, or about the movement of the tribes. I'm simply acting as a guide from the country. Who is your friend here, the alchemist asked. The chief asked. An alchemist, said the alchemist. He understands the force of nature, and he wants to show you this extraordinary power. The boy listened quietly and fearfully. What is a foreigner doing here? Asked one of the men. He's brought money to give your tribe, said the alchemist. Before the boy could say a word, and seizing the boy's bag, the alchemist gave the gold coins to the chief. The Arab accepted them without a word. There was enough to buy a lot of weapons. What is an alchemist? He asked finally. He's a man who understands nature and the world. If he wanted to, he could destroy the stone, just with the force of the wind. The man laughed. They were used to ravages of war and knew the wind could not deliver them a fatal blow. They each felt his heart beat a bit faster. They were men of the desert, and they were fearful of sorcerers. I just want to see him do it, said the chief. He needs 3 days, answered the alchemist. He's going to transform himself into the wind, just to demonstrate his powers. If he can't do so, we humbly offer you our lives, for the honor of your tribe. You can't offer me something that's already mine, the chief said arrogantly. But he granted the travelers 3 days. The boy was shaking with fear, but the alchemist helped him out of the tent. Don't let them see that you're afraid, the alchemist said. They are brave men, but they are despised cowards. But the boy couldn't even speak. He was able to do so only after they'd walked through the center of the camp. There was no need to imprison them. The Arabs simply confiscated their horses. So once again, the world had demonstrated its many languages. The desert only moments ago had been endless and free, and now is an impenetrable wall. You gave them everything I had, the boy said. Everything I've saved in my entire life. Well, what good would it be to you if you had to die, the alchemist answered. Your money saved us for 3 days. It's not often that money saves a person alive. But the boy was too frightened to listen to the words of wisdom. He had no idea how he was going to transform himself into the wind. He wasn't an alchemist. The alchemist asked one of the soldiers for some tea, and poured some on the boy's wrist. A wave of relief washed over him, and the alchemist muttered some words that the boy didn't understand. Don't give in to your fears, said the alchemist in a strangely gentle voice. If you do, you won't be able to talk to your heart. But I have no idea how to turn myself into the wind. If a person is living out his personal legend, he knows everything he needs to know. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, the fear of failure. I'm not afraid of failing. It's just that I don't know how to turn myself into the wind. Well, you'll have to learn. Your life depends on it. But what if I can't? Then you'll die in the midst of trying to realize your personal legend. It's a lot better than dying like millions of other people who never even knew what their personal legends were. But don't worry, the alchemist continued. Usually the threat of death makes people a lot more aware of their lives. The first day passed, there was a major battle nearby, and a number of wounded were brought back to the camp. The dead soldiers were replaced by others, and life went on. Death doesn't change anything, the boy thought. You could have died later on, the soldier said. The body of one of his companions. You could have died after peace had been declared, but in any case, you were going to die. At the end of the day, the boy went looking for the alchemist who had taken his falcon out into the desert. I still have no idea how to turn myself into the wind, the boy repeated. Remember what I told you. The world is only the visible aspect of God, and that is what alchemy does, to bring spiritual perfection into contact with the marital plane. What are you doing? Feeding my falcon. If I'm not able to turn myself into the wind, we're going to die, the boy said. Why feed your falcon? You're the one who may die, the alchemist said. I already know how to turn myself into the wind. On the second day, the boy climbed on top of the cliff near the camp. The sentinels allowed him to go. They had already heard about the sorcerer who could turn himself into the wind, and they didn't want to get near him. In any case, the desert was impassable. He spent the entire afternoon of the second day looking out over the desert and listening to his heart. The boy knew the desert sensed his fear. They both spoke the same language. On the third day, the chief met with his officers. He called the alchemist to a meeting and said, "Let's go see the boy who turns himself into the wind." "Let's," the alchemist answered. The boy took them to the cliff where he had been the previous day. He told them all to be seated. "It's going to take a while," the boy said. "We're in no hurry," the chief answered. "We are men of the desert." The boy looked out on the horizon. There were mountains in the distance, and there were dunes, rocks, and plains that insisted on living where survival seemed impossible. There was the desert that he wandered for so many months. Despite all that time, he knew only a small part of it. Within that part, he had found an Englishman, caravans, tribal wars, and an oasis of 50,000 palm trees and 300 wells. "What do you want here today?" the desert asked him. "Didn't you spend enough time looking at me yesterday?" "Somewhere you were holding the person I love," the boy said. "So when I look out over your sands, I am also looking at her. I want to return to her, and I need your help so I can turn myself into the wind." "What is love?" the desert asked. "Love is the falcon's flight over your sands, because for him you are a green field from which he always returns with game. He knows your rocks, your dunes, and your mountains, and you are generous to him." "The falcon's beak carries bits of me, myself," the desert says. "For years I cave for his game, feeding it with the little water that I have. And then I show him where the game is. And one day, as I enjoy the fact that his game thrives on my surface, the falcon dives out of the sky and takes away what I've created." "But that's why you created the game in the first place," the boy answered, "to nourish the falcon, and then the falcon nourishes man, and eventually man will nourish your sands, where the game will once again flourish. That's how the world goes." "So is that what love is?" "Yes, that is what love is. It's what makes the game become the falcon. It's what makes the falcon become man, and man in his turn the desert. It's what turns lead into gold and makes the gold return to earth." "I don't understand what you're talking about," the desert said. "But you can at least understand that somewhere in your sands there's a woman waiting for me, and that's why I have to turn myself into wind." The desert didn't answer him for a few moments. Then it told him, "I'll give you my sands to help the wind blow, but alone I can't do anything. You have to ask for help from the wind." The breeze began to blow. The tribesmen watched the boy from a distance, talking amongst themselves in a language the boy couldn't understand. The alchemist smiled. The wind approached the boy and touched his face. It knew the boy's talk with the desert, because the winds know everything. They blow across the world without a birthplace and with no place to die. "Help me," the boy said. "One day you carried the voice of my loved one to me. Who taught you to speak the language of the desert and the wind?" "My heart," the boy answered. "The wind has many names. In that part of the world, it was called the Sikoro, because it brought moisture from the oceans to the east. In the distant land the boy came from, they called it the Levanter, because they believed that it brought with it the sands of the desert and the screams of the Moorish wars. Perhaps in the places beyond the pastures where his sheep lived, men thought that the wind came from Andalusia. But actually, the wind came from no place at all, nor did it go to any place. That's why it was stronger than the desert. Someone might say, plant trees in the desert and even raise sheep there. but never could they harness the wind. You can't be the wind said. We're two very different things. That's not true, the boy said. I learned all the Alchemist's secrets and travels. I have inside me the winds, the deserts, the oceans, the stars, and everything created in the universe. We're all made by the same hand, and we have the same soul. I want to be like you. I want to be able to reach every corner of the world, cross the seas, blow away the sands that cover my treasure, and carry the voice of the woman I love. I heard what you were talking about the other day with the alchemist, the one said. He said that everything has its own personal legend. People can't turn themselves to the wind. Just teach me to be the wind for a few moments, the boy said, so you and I can talk about the limitless possibilities of people in the wind. The wind's curiosity was aroused, something that had never happened before. It wanted to talk about those things, but it didn't know how to turn the man into a wind. And look at how many things the wind already knew how to do. It created deserts, sank ships, felled entire forests, and blew through cities filled with music and strange noises. It felt that it had no limits, yet here was a boy saying that there was no other things the wind should be able to do. This is what we call love, the boy said, seeing that the wind was close granting a request. When you are loved, you can do anything in creation. When you are loved, there is no need to all understand what is happening, because everything happens within you, and even men can turn themselves into the wind, as long as the wind helps you, of course. The wind was a proud being, and it was becoming irritated with what the boy was saying. It commanded to blow harder, raising the desert sands, but finally had to recognize that even making its way around the world didn't know how to turn the man into the wind. And it knew nothing about love. In my travels around the world, I've often seen people speaking of love and looking towards the heavens, the wind said, furious at having to acknowledge its own limitations. Maybe it's better to ask heaven. Well then, help me do that, the boy said. Fill this place with sandstone so strong that it blots out the sun. Then I can look to heaven without blinding myself. The wind blew with all of its strength, and the sky was filled with sand. The sun was turned into a golden disk. At the end of the camp, it was difficult to see anything. The men of the desert were already familiar with the wind. They called it tsunami, and it was worse than a storm at sea. Their horses cried out, and their weapons were filled with sand. On the heights, one of the commanders turned to the chief and said, "Maybe we better have end this." They could barely see the boy. Their faces were covered with the blue cloth, and their eyes showed fear. "Let's stop this," another commander said. "I want to see the greatness of Allah," the chief said with respect. "I want to see how a man turns himself into the wind." But he made a mental note of the names of the two men who expressed their fear. As soon as the wind stopped, he was going to remove them from their commands, because true men of the desert are not afraid. "The wind told me that you know about love," the boy said to the sun. "If you know about love, you must also know about the soul of the world, because it's made of love." "From where I am," the sun said, "I can see the soul of the world, communicates with my soul, and together we are caused the plains to grow, and the sheep to seek out the shade. From where I am, and I'm a long way from earth, I learned how to love. I know that if I ever came a bit closer to earth, everything there would die, and the soul of the world would no longer exist. So we contemplate each other, and we want each other, and I want to give life and warmth. It gives me a reason for living." "So you know about love," the boy said. "And I know about the soul of the world, because we have talked at great length to each other during this endless trip through the universe. It tells me that its greatest problem is that up until now, only the minerals and vegetables understand that all things are one. There's no need for iron to be the same as copper, or copper to be the same as gold. Each performs its own exact function as a unique being, and everything would be a symphony of peace if the hand that wrote all of this had stopped filth creation." "But there was a sixth day," the sun went on. "You are wise because you observe everything from a distance," the boy said, "but you don't know about love. If there hadn't been a sixth day, man would not exist. Copper would always just be copper, and lead just lead. It's true that everything has its own personal legend, but one day that personal legend will be realized. So each thing has to transform itself into something better, and to acquire a new personal legend, until someday the soul of the world becomes one and one thing only." The sun thought about that, and decided to shine more brightly. The wind, which was enjoying their conversation, started to blow with greater force, so that the sun did not blind the boy. "This is why alchemy exists," this boy said. "So that everyone will search for his treasure, find it, and then want to be better in his former life. Lead will play its role until the world has no further need for lead, and then lead will turn itself into gold. That's what alchemists do. They show that we strive to become better than we are. Everything around us becomes better too." Well, why didn't you say that I didn't know about love? The sun asked the boy. Because it's not love to be static like the desert, nor is it to roam the world like the wind, and it's not love to see everything from a distance like you do. Love is the force that transforms and improves the soul of the world. When I first reached through to it, I thought the soul of the world was perfect, but later I could see that it was like other aspects of creation and had its own passion and wars. It is who we nourish the soul of the world, and who live in better or worse, depending on whether we become better or worse. And that's where the power of love comes in, because when we love, we always strive to become better than we are. So what do you want of me? The sun asked. I want you to help me turn myself into the wind, the boy answered. Nature knows me as the wisest being in creation, the sign says, but I don't know how to turn you into wind. Then whom shall I ask? The sun paused for a moment. The wind was listening closely and wanted to tell every other corner of the world the sun's wisdom had its limitations. It was unable to deal with this boy who spoke the language of the world. Speak to the hand that wrote it all, asked the sun. The wind screamed with delight and blew harder than ever. They were being blown from their tireless earth, and animals were being freed from their tethers. On the cliffs, the men clutched each other as they sought to keep from being blown away. The boy turned his hand as he wrote it all. As he did so, he sensed that the universe had fallen silent, and he decided not to speak. A current of love rushed from his heart, and the boy began to pray. It was a prayer that he had never said before, because it was a prayer without words or pleas. His prayer didn't give thanks for his sheep having found new pastures. It didn't ask the boy to be able to sell more crystal, and it didn't beseech that the woman he had met would await his return. In the silence, the boy understood that the desert, the wind, and the sun were also trying to understand the signs written by the hand, and were seeking to follow their paths, and to understand what had written on every single emerald. He saw that omens were scattered throughout the earth and in space, and that there were no reason or significance attached to appearances. He could see that not the deserts, nor winds, nor the sun, nor people knew why they had been created, but that the hand had a reason for all of this, and that only the hand could perform miracles, or transform the sea into a desert, or a man into the wind, because only the hand understood that it was a larger design that had moved the universe to the point at which 6 days of creation evolved into a masterwork. The boy reached through the soul of the world and saw that it was part of the soul of God, and he saw that the soul of God was in his own soul, and that he, a boy, could perform miracles. The simum blew that day as never blown before. For generations thereafter, the Arabs recounted the legend of a boy who turned himself into the wind, almost destroying a military camp, in defiance of the most powerful chief in the desert. When the simum ceased to blow, everyone looked to the place where the boy had been, but he was no longer there. He was standing next to a sand-covered sentinel on the far side of the camp. The man terrified at his sorcery, for there were 2 people who were smiling, the alchemist because he had found his disciple, and the chief because the disciple understood the glory of God. The following day, the general bade of the boy and the alchemist bid farewell, and provided with an escort to accompany as far as they chose. They rode for the entire day towards the end of the afternoon. They came upon a Coptic monastery. The alchemist dismounted and told the escorts they could return to the camp. From here on, you will be alone, the alchemist said. You are only 3 hours away from the pyramids. Thank you, said the boy. You taught me the language of the world. I only invoked what you knew. The alchemist knocked on the gate of the monastery. A monk, dressed in black, came to the gates. They spoke for a few moments in the Coptic tongue, and the alchemist bade the boy enter. I asked him to let me use the kitchen for a while, the alchemist smiled. They went to the kitchen at the back of the monastery. The alchemist lighted the fire, and the monk brought him some lead. The alchemist played in his iron pan. When the lead had become liquid, the alchemist took from his pouch the strange yellow egg. He scraped it from a silver as thin as a hair, wrapped it in wax, and added it to the pan which the lead had melted. The mixture took on a reddish color, almost the color of blood. The alchemist removed the pan from the fire and set it aside to cool. As he did so, he talked with the monk about the tribal wars. I think they're going to last for a long time, he said to the monk. The monk was irritated. The caravans had been stopped at Giza for some time, waiting for the wars to end. But God will be done, the monk said. Exactly, answered the alchemist. When the pan had cooled, the monk and the boy looked at it dazzled. The lead had dried into the shape of the pan, but it was no longer lead, it was gold. Will I learn to do that someday, the boy asked. This was my personal legend, not yours, the alchemist answered, but I want to show you that it was possible. They returned to the gates of the monastery. There, the alchemist separated the disc into 4 parts. This is for you, he said, holding one of the parts to the monk. It's for your generosity to the pilgrims. But this payment goes well beyond my generosity, the monk explained. Don't say that again. Life might be listening and give you less the next time. The alchemist turned to the boy. This is for you, to make up what you gave to the general. The boy was about to say it was much more given general, but he kept quiet because he heard what the alchemist said to the monk. And this is for me, the alchemist, keeping one of the parts, because I have to return to the desert where the tribal wars. He took forth the part and handed it to the monk. This is for the boy if he ever needs it. But I'm going in search of my treasure, the boy said. I'm very close to it now, and I'm certain you'll find it, the boy said. Then why? Because you have already lost your savings twice, once to a thief and once to the general. I'm an old superstitious Arab, and I believe in proverbs. There's one that says everything that happens once can never happen again, but everything that happens twice will surely happen a third time. They mounted on their horses. I want to tell you a story about dreams, said the alchemist. The boy brought his horse closer. In ancient Rome, at the time of Emperor Tiberius, there lived a good man who had 2 sons. One was in the military and had been sent to the most distant realms of the empire. The other son was a poet and delighted all of Rome with his beautiful verses. One night, the father had a dream. An angel appeared to him and told him that the words of one of his sons would be learned and repeated throughout the world for all generations to come. The father woke from his dream, grateful and crying because life was generous and had revealed to him something that any father would be proud to know. Shortly thereafter, the father died as he tried to save a child who was about to be crushed by the wheels of a chariot. Since he lived his entire life in a manner that was correct and fair, he went directly to heaven, where he met an angel that appeared in his dream. You were always a good man, the angel said to him. You lived your life in a loving way and died with dignity. I can now grant you any wish you desire. Life was good to me, the man said. When you appeared in my dream, I felt that all my efforts have been rewarded, because my son's poems will be read by men for generations to come. I don't want anything for myself, but any father would be proud of the fame achieved by the one whom he cared for as a child and educated as he grew up. Sometime in the distant future, I would like to see my son's words. The angel touched the man's shoulder, and they were both projected far into the future. They were in an immersed setting, surrounded by thousands of people speaking a strange language. The man wept with happiness. I knew that my son's poems were immortal, he said to the angel through tears. Can you please tell me which one of my son's poems these people were playing? The angel came close to the man, and with tenderness led him to a bench nearby where he sat down. The verses of your son, who is the poet, very popular in Rome, the angel said. Everyone loved them and enjoyed them. Where the reign of Tiberius ended, his poems were forgotten. The words you're hearing now are those of your son in the military. The man looked at the angel in surprise. Your son went to serve at a distant place and became a centurion. He did just and good. One afternoon, one of his servants fell ill, and it appeared that he would die. Your son had heard of a rabbi who was able to cure illness, and he rode out for 4 days in search of this man. Along the way, he learned that the man was seeking the Son of God. He met others who had been cured by him, and they instructed your son in the man's teachings. And so despite the fact that he was a Roman centurion, he converted to their faith. Shortly thereafter, he reached the place where the man was looking for visited. He told the man that one of his servants was gravely ill, and the rabbi made ready to go to his house with him. But the centurion was a man of faith, and looking into the eyes of the rabbi, he knew that he was surely in the presence of the Son of God. And this is what your son said, the angel told the man. These are the words that he said to the rabbi at the point, and they have never been forgotten. My lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word and my servant will be healed, the alchemist said. No matter what he does, every person on earth plays a central role in the history of the world, and normally he doesn't know it. The boy smiled. He had never imagined that questions about his life would be such important to a shepherd. Goodbye, said the alchemist. Goodbye, said the shepherd. The boy rode along the desert for several hours, listening avidly to what his heart had said. His heart would tell him where his treasure was hidden. Where your treasure is, there will also be your heart, the alchemist told him. But his heart was speaking of other things with pride. It told a story of a shepherd who had left his flock to follow a dream he had on 2 different occasions. It told of personal legend and of the many men who had wandered in search of distant lands or beautiful women, confronting the people of their times just with preconceived notions. It spoke of journeys, discoveries, books, and change. As he was about to climb yet another dune, his heart whispered, Be aware of the place where you were brought to tears. That's where I am, and that's where your treasure is. As soon as The boy climbed on the dune slowly. A full moon rose again in the starry sky. It had been months since he had set forth on the oasis. The moonlight had cast shadows forth to the dunes, creating the appearance of a rolling sea. It reminded the boy of the day when he had a horse and reared in the desert, and he had come to know the alchemist. And the moon fell on the desert silence, and a man's journey in search of treasure. When he reached on top of the dune, his heart leapt. There, illuminated by the light of the moon and the brightness of the desert, stood the solemn and majestic pyramids of Egypt. The boy fell to his knees and wept. He thanked God for making him believe in his personal legend and for leading him to meet a king, a merchant, an Englishman, and an alchemist. And above all, for having met the woman of the desert who had told him that love would never keep a man from personal legend. If he wanted to, he could now return to the oasis, go back to Fatima, and live his life as a simple shepherd. After all, the alchemist continued to live in the desert. Even though he understood the language of the world and knew how to transform lead into gold, he didn't need to demonstrate his science and art to anyone. The boy told himself that on the way towards realizing his own personal legend, he had learned all that he needed to know and experienced everything he may have dreamed of. But here he was, at the point of finding his treasure, and he reminded himself that no project is complete until its objective has been achieved. The boy looked at the sands around him and saw where his tears had fallen. A scarab beetle was scuttling through the sand. During this time in the desert, he had learned in Egypt that scarab beetles are a sign of God. Another Ogham, the boy thought, go through dune. As soon as he did, he thought of what the crystal merchant once said, that anyone could build a pyramid in his backyard. The boy could see now that he couldn't do so if he placed a stone upon the rest of his life. Throughout the night, the boy dug at the palace he'd chosen, but he found nothing. He felt weighted down by the centuries of time. The pyramids had been built, but he didn't stop. He struggled to continue digging as he fought through the wind, which often blew the sand back in excavation. His hands were abraded and exhausted, but he listened to his heart. It had told him where to dig, where his fellows were, and he was able to pull out the rocks he had encountered. He heard footsteps. Several figures approached him. Their backs were to the moonlight, and the boy could see neither their eyes nor their faces. "What are you doing here?" one of the figures demanded. Because he was terrified, the boy didn't answer. He had found where his treasure was, and was frightened what might happen. "We're refugees from the tribal wars, and we need money," the other figure says. "What are you hiding there?" "I'm not hiding anything," the boy answered. But one of them seized the boy and yanked him back out of the hole. Another, who was searching the boy's bags, found a piece of gold. "There's gold in here," he said. The moon shone on the face of the Arab who seized him, and in the man's eye the boy saw death. "He's probably got more gold hidden in the ground." They made the boy continue digging, but he found nothing. As the sun rose, the man began to beat the boy. He was bruised and bleeding. His clothing was torn to shreds, and he felt that death was near. "What good is money for you if you're going to die?" "It's not often that money can save someone's life," the alchemist has said. Finally, the boy screamed at the men, "I'm digging for treasure!" And although his mouth was bleeding swollen, he told his attackers that he twice dreamed of the treasure hidden in the pyramids of Egypt. The man, who appeared to be a leader of the group, spoke to one another. "Leave him. He doesn't have anything else. He must have stolen this gold." The boy fell to the sand, nearly unconscious. The leader shook him and said, "We're leaving." But before they could left, he went back to the boy and said, "You're not going to die. You'll live, and you'll learn that a man shouldn't be so stupid. 2 years ago, right in this spot, I had a reoccurring dream too. I dreamed that I should travel to the fields of Spain and look for a ruined church with shepherds in their sleep ship. In my dream, there was a sycamore growing out of the ruins in Sarcicity, and I was told that if I dug at the roots of the sycamore, I would find a hidden treasure. But I'm not so stupid as to cross an entire desert just because of a reoccurrent dream." And they disappeared. The boy stood up shakily and once more looked at the pyramids. They seemed to laugh at him. They laughed back, his heart bursting with joy, because he now knew where his treasure was. The boy reached the small abandoned church as the night was falling. The sycamore was there, in the sacristy, and the stars could still be seen. Through the half-destroyed roof, he remembered that time he had been there with his sheep. It had been a peaceful night, except for the dream. Now he was not with his flock, but with a shovel. He sat looking at the sky for a long time. Then he took from his knapsack a bottle of wine and drank some. He remembered the night in the desert when he sat with the alchemist as they looked at the stars and drank wine together. He thought of the many roads he had traveled and of the strange way God had chosen to show him treasure. If he hadn't believed in the significance of recurrent dreams, he would not have met the gypsy woman, the king, the thief, or... Well, it's a long list, but the path was written. In the omens, and there was no way I could go wrong, he said to himself. He fell asleep, and when he awoke, the sun was already high. He began to dig at the base of the sycamore. You old sorcerer, the boy shouted at the sky. You knew the whole story. You even left a bit of the gold at the monastery so I could get back to this church. The monk laughed, and he saw me back in tatters. Couldn't you save me from that? No, he heard a voice in his head. If you had told me, you wouldn't have seen the pyramids. They're beautiful, aren't they? The boy smiled and continued digging. Half an hour later, his shovel hit something solid, and an hour later, before him had a chest of Spanish gold coins. There were also precious stone, gold masks adorned with red and white feathers, and stone statues embedded with jewels, the spoils of a conquest that the country had long ago forgotten, and that some courtier failed to tell his children about. The boy took Urim and Thummim from his bag. He had used the two stones only once, one morning at the marketplace. His life and his path provided him with long enough omens. He placed Urim and Thummim in the chest. They were also a part of his new treasure, because they were a reminder of the old king we will never see again. It's true. Life really is generous to those who pursue their journey in legend, the boy thought. He remembered that he had to go to Tarfida so he can get 1/10 of his treasure to the gypsy woman, as he had promised. This gypsy are really smart, he thought. Maybe it's because they moved around so much. The wind began to blow again. It was the Levanter, the wind that came from Africa. It didn't bring it with the smell of the desert, nor the threat of the Moorish invasion. Instead, it brought the scent of a perfume he knew well, and the touch of a kiss that came far away, slowly, until it rested on his lips. The boy smiled. It was the first time she had done that. I'm coming, Fatima, he said.